Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 1.5 million new homes, the local government challenge, sponsored by Loft. My name's Toby Fox. Now, the government wants to get 1.5 million new homes built, and the key delivery arm for that national ambition is local government, whether it's as a planning authority or JV partner or directly delivering new homes. So I've been visiting a different council each month to ask what works and what needs to change to enable them to deliver more homes. This month, I've been in Slough, a borough just outside the west of London, and I've been posting a number of interviews from Slough on social media channels during the month. Today, we're going to pick up on some of the issues raised during those interviews and discuss them in more detail. And we're looking for some probing questions from you in the audience through the Q&A and through the chat, and from our special guests. And they are in alphabetical order. Pat Hayes, Executive Director of Regeneration, Housing and Environment at Slough Borough Council. Neil Jervis, a partner at housing consultancy Loft. Julia Krause, the Assistant Director for the South East at Homes England. And Suzanne Smith, partner at law firm Capsticks. Over the next hour with these guests, we're going to be talking about 4 topics. We're going to look at Homes England's new mandate and what it means for housing delivery. We're going to look at land values and the ways in which the biggest break on delivery might be addressed. We're going to look on guidance on deploying CPOs to accelerate delivery, and we're going to look at the likely impact of the government's skills hub on delivery. So let's begin at the top of all of that with Julia Krause. Julia, can you tell us what's changed at Homes England and what the mandate is now and what impact that's likely to have on delivery?
Thanks, Toby. Absolutely. So for anyone that isn't familiar with Homes England is the government's housing regeneration delivery agency. So effectively it delivers on policy. And at the back end of September, we had a very clear mandate set by the new government and by the housing minister, asking us to use all of the powers that we have in order to drive housing delivery and to drive towards the 1.5 million homes. So number one objective in that letter is very much about, doing everything we can to drive that delivery. It also talks about our role in the New Homes Accelerator. That is about accelerating housing sites that are, for whatever reason it might be, not moving through the system as quickly as we would like to. Also supporting major schemes and the New Towns Initiative, and a big focus around delivery of social rent homes, as well as supporting the reform and diversification of the sector. So we've had a really clear mandate to make sure that we're in the right space and place to deliver and support that delivery. For me and my team, I'm focused on the southeast of England, so I cover everything up to Northamptonshire, over to the coast in the east and the south, and over to Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Hampshire in the west. So a really big and very active region.
Fantastic, thanks, Julia. And what's changed in your mandate to deliver? What's new that's going to impact local authorities?
I suppose to some extent it's about the way we're supporting. We have a lot of funds that are already existing. So we have grant funding and also lending and other tools at our disposal to be able to support. But there are a number of new initiatives. So we talked about the New Homes Accelerator. There was a call for sites for that. There's been a huge amount of interest in that, I think it's fair to say. And also we have our own Atlas, what we call Atlas, which is actually trying to support the delivery of some of those projects and some of the stalled sites. So I can come back and talk a little bit about that later on. And so we're looking to understand what's going on, to continue to understand that, but to understand where we can support, whether that be on a project basis or more generally.
And you've got this is part of the restructure that involves new chief exec, new chair, and so on and so forth as well. Julia, are you expecting that to cause further changes down the line? Are you expecting more impact on delivery?
I mean, I think that the mandate we have is very, very clear, and I've worked very closely with both Peters in my time at the agency. That will continue to be the case. The focus around place-based regeneration, the focus around housing delivery is absolutely going to continue to be our mandate, and we very much see this letter as our the indication of what we need to be doing to support the market.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, questions for Homes England into the Q&A audience. Pat, just turning to you, what's your expectation of Homes England in helping Slough deliver more homes?
Yeah, I'm not sure necessarily an expectation, but I mean, it is really good that the new government have given the agency, I suppose, a very clear mission in terms of housing delivery being the focus and support to the housing sector. And I suppose what we're looking for, as always, is as local authorities, we need a funding partner, particularly to help with the delivery of affordable housing, but also to help unlocking stalled sites and dealing with difficult sites. So, I think the direction of travel is the right one. Clearly, around delivering that number is a massive challenge, and there are quite a lot of hurdles to overcome. But, I think, all of us who work with Homes England to date felt, it's always been a positive relationship, and hopefully this increased drive, and hopefully the real thing, of course, is more cash, both in terms of total volume of money available to support site acquisition, but also the individual grant rate around affordable housing, which is sort of lagged behind where we really need to be. So that's what I'd be looking for, and hopefully that will be forthcoming.
Julia, do you want to just respond to that? I mean, is there, how much more grant is going to be forthcoming? How much more money do you predict you're going to have access to?
I mean, I don't think we know. So I can talk about what we have access to at the moment. So we have had £500 million confirmed through the recent budget for affordable housing programme. And so that's very much continuing to support that particular programme, and obviously very welcome. We also have currently what we call our Brownfield Infrastructure and Land Fund, which is our main grant funding programme. And that currently runs to March 2026. So we're very focused on delivery through that at the moment. We also have a number of other programmes which support debt and equity into projects as well. So we have a number of different sort of tools at our disposal presently, and we're looking to use those and leverage those as best we can. I think, the other thing that I find that me and my team do quite a bit of, and we're looking to do as an agency, is very much use our convening role as well. So it's not just about the funding, that's obviously important, but actually how we support, whether that's through our own skills and experience, or whether that's through joining up other bits of government with other arm's length bodies, or other areas, or even sharing best practice. So where we're seeing something work really successfully in one geography, perhaps looking to think about how that's relevant elsewhere. And I think it's one of the things that's really kind of interesting being involved in the agency, because we're looking across a lot of local authority areas. We can really sort of help join those things up. So yes, the funding's part of what we do, but there's other things that we look to do alongside that, which add value.
Great, thanks. Neil, Suzanne, do put your hands up if you'd like to comment, but I'm just going to go on with a question of my own. So Julia, if there's a scheme that is kind of in operation, in delivery, with an overlap of funding regime, so the funding ends next year, there's a spending review, there's a new set of budgets granted, what happens to schemes that are kind of caught between the two stools?
I mean, I think it will depend what gets confirmed by way of future funding, but we are continuing to work with places to understand what their needs are, what those projects might need by way of support, what they what whether it's our skills, whether it's the joining up, and really continue to understand those projects. So we continue to engage with the market, and that might be local authorities, that might be also with private sector partners and RPs as well, to really understand what it is that they will need to help tailor that, and that that will continue. We'll continue to do that.
And is that potentially an opportunity to revisit schemes that are becoming less viable during the period?
I mean, it depends on the what the challenges are, I suppose, of those schemes. So some of the schemes that we see, it's a viability challenge. Sometimes it's a forward funding challenge. So it might be that ultimately the scheme might be viable, but there's a temporal element to it, or it might be actually that there's a different sort of investment structure. We're needed to supporting it in another way. So it really depends on the project about kind of what fits needed, and what fit and how. And one of the things that we try to do is make sure we join those programs up as best we can. And to use a sort of recent example, we announced recently Barking Riverside. We put a big investment into there. That is a combination of loan and grant. And so that's been quite carefully structured to make and tailored actually to that particular project. So we try to use our funds in a way that isn't just one size fits all.
Thanks, Julia. Neil, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was going to just say, really, from our perspective, our housing association and local authority clients, that flexibility around grant funding is really critical. There's a lot of decision making that can be delayed, and risks that are uncertain when there are hard stops on programs. So it would really welcome that sort of live, flexible approach going forward, I think, for the future program.
Thanks, Neil. And Pat, there's a Live Homes England site in Slough that we visited when we came to the borough. Is there? What do you need to happen to get that project moving forward?
I mean, that's an example of a good outcome, actually, in terms it was a site that we had that we didn't have the resource anymore to bring forward. So sold the site to Homes England. They've now got a development partner in Muse through the English Cities Fund, and that will now come forward. So, I mean, that in many ways is the very good example of government through Homes England acquiring a site and expediting development, and that's what I suppose a lot of us would like to see more of, and that's a more continental model of development rather than just necessarily leaving everything to the private sector. This is a good example of the government through one of its agencies stepping in, acquiring a site which had been sitting for a considerable period of time, and now bringing that through the planning process. So that's I think a good example of what we ought to be doing.
And Julia, is that a model of good practice for Homes England? Is that a kind of template for what you'd like to do elsewhere? And are you planning more?
Well, we do we do acquire land, and we also have a lot of land within our ownership already, and we very much look to drive delivery on those sites. I mean, one example is Northstowe. So you might have seen there's been quite a bit announced about Northstowe in recent months in terms of accelerating delivery there. And so we very much look at that acquisition as one of the tools at our disposal to help support the market and actually drive delivery.
Can you just unpack Northstowe a bit, just for viewers who aren't aware of that?
So Northstowe is a new settlement to the northwest of Cambridge. It's about 10,000 homes ultimately. The first phase is delivered and on site. So some of the infrastructure already, like the school, is already in, and we're looking at how we bring forward later phases presently. So it's a way in which we've looked to drive the delivery and support the wider housing market in that area.
Great, thanks, Julia. Now, I know you're not able to talk about policy. Your focus is on delivery. So if this crosses over that line, just say. But I'm just wondering about well, okay, no, let's move on, because that is policy and I know what you're going to say. Viewers, if you've got any questions for Homes England, do put them in the Q&A, and we'll raise them with Julia. But in the meantime, let's move the conversation on to the second area we were going to talk about, which was land values. This kind of feels like a topic too big for any one webinar and for any one group of 4 or 5 people. But it's Pat, you identified it during the interviews that we did in Slough. You identified this as like the single biggest break on delivery is the way in which land is valued. So there are ways in which we might address this. These are going to sort of stray into requirements for new regulation and a considerable amount of debate, I imagine. But do you want to just outline the problem as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a slightly multifaceted problem. It's definitely a problem in the southeast, and actually in areas of greater economic growth and activity, and infrastructure investment as well. Because one of the challenges that we have in Slough are there are a lot of sites, many of them cleared and ready to go, which essentially the purchasers bought at too high a value, either because the infrastructure investment in things like Crossrail was more than once. There was a good over-optimism about ongoing growth in house prices and rental values, and also to a degree a little bit, I suspect, of sort of bidding frenzy in certain places. But we've got a number of sites, quite a significant number of sites, which are essentially stalled because the owner developers can't bring a viable scheme forward, essentially because they paid too much for the land. Complicated, obviously, in recent years, we've seen very sharp increase post-Brexit in construction costs, and we've also seen significant increase due to the post-Grenfell fire regulations and some of the rules around cores and stairwells and a number of lifts, etc., which have all pushed viability. So that there are people who bought sites with an assumption around build cost, which is now way adrift. And this whole issue, there are a lot of sites which could be brought forward quite quickly, but the current landowner isn't prepared to do that because they can't do it at a loss. And the question, therefore, is how we try and unlock some of these sites. And again, is it around government intervention in terms of the government buying these sites at the value that was paid for them, plus whatever the inflationary uplift is, to then either move them forward to another party or directly develop them, rather than other mechanisms that we need to adopt. And for me, the thing I think we need to think about is how there is greater state control around land value, whether that's enabling local authorities through their local plans to designate certain areas for particular housing types, whether that's affordable housing or rental housing, which I know planning purists don't like, but it would have that effect of capping price to a degree in certain areas. And the other big challenge, obviously, that we have in the UK is that land is so often used as an investment asset rather than as a development asset, effectively. So you get overseas capital essentially being parked in land, and actually the owner of the land knows the value will go up, therefore their investment is safe, and they've actually got very limited incentive to bring forward a development, because they'll just sit and get the return from the land, possibly from some meanwhile uses as well. So I think there are a number of challenges around land value.
You also mentioned creating a planning class, a use class for affordable homes in order to suppress land value.
Yeah, that's the point I just mentioned, that one of the ways of doing that would be using the planning system through designating, either as a use class or through designation in local plans, particular areas simply for particular housing types. So you could designate an area as affordable housing to effectively suppress the price of that particular plot of land. Say planning cognoscenti don't like that, and I can see why. There are logical arguments against it, but it would be an effective measure.
Suzanne, it feels like it's time to bring you into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Actually having a use class specifically just for affordable housing. And I think some years ago there was some discussion about that, and it didn't progress any further. Whether that is something that could be taken forward remains to be seen. We've obviously had a lot of changes to planning use classes over the last couple of years in light of, you know, the things such as COVID. Obviously, that had such a big change on. We've also got the office to resi. So I think there's some elements that, yes, that could be a way forward, but then I think that could potentially cause some issues in terms of charging land and things like that if it's actually its own use class. So I think there's kind of different realms around that as to whether that would be something that would actually be taken forward, but certainly something that is a consideration on the table.
What about the sort of wider aspects of the theme that that land value is the big break on development? I mean, what else would you like to see change, Suzanne, if that is the case, to get more homes built?
I think from a planning perspective, I think there's a lot of talk, isn't there, around what reforms can happen. And, you know, we've obviously got the new NPPF coming out just before Christmas, hopefully. And it's always going to be interesting to see whether actually the things that are put forward actually turn into something and materialise into whether this is actually going to ensure that you know, the land values are, you know, at an affordable price. I did a lot in Section 106 agreements and the community infrastructure levy, and I think there's a lot of potential around that for change.
Okay, we've got a point coming in from Justin Elcombe that the problem isn't, in fact, land value. So Justin's position is that it's actually the steep rise in costs outside of land, so build costs and labour costs and planning applications and so on. Pat, how do you respond to that?
Actually agreeing with what I said, because actually what I said was it's the combination of land value and the reality then of the very steep post-Brexit increase in build cost and labour cost, but that people who bought land at a particular value then can't develop it in today's world. Yeah, I think they're both part of the same equation. If you pay less for land, you can afford to pay rather more on the construction side. I don't think you can divorce the two. Yeah, you could see land price hold up if you had a long-term reduction in construction costs, but that's never going to happen. And there are very few tools that government can use to bring that about. You know, rejoining the single market would possibly help, but it's not going to bring them down in real terms. It will just stop the increase. Great.
Okay, well, Neil, I'm going to bring you in now because so we've got a number of threads running around, you know, planning use classes, around land as an investment rather than a developable asset. But we've also got this idea that, you know, if you can't, it's about the generally costs and money available. If you can't decrease the costs, then you're going to have to increase the amount of money you're spending in order to get more homes built. I mean, is it that simple?
I mean, what we're certainly observing in the market is that land values haven't reduced to reflect the fact that build costs are so high. We're seeing some reductions, but in many instances, landowners are just holding on to land and not developing. They have the funds innate to enable them to do that. So really, some of the more complex planning proposals in terms of having a specific use classes are, I think, longer term strategies, aren't they? And they are beset with issues. So I do think it unfortunately at the moment, in order to kickstart a program or kickstart more construction, it is going to result in additional public subsidy in the form of grant. I think I'm not sure there's many levers to pull on it than that at the moment.
And if what we're told is true and that there is no more money, I mean, you know, we're all waiting for the spending review, but the spending review is now being pushed back to June. Then does that just mean that we're not going to get the acceleration in housing delivery that we're looking for?
Potentially. I mean, working in partnership with developers and fixing some of the issues we have with Section 106s at the moment, where a lot of housing associations are not taking up Section 106 opportunities, is certainly causing developers around the country an issue. So there are ways and means of working in a closer manner with developers, but at the moment, without that subsidy, I think it will be a challenge.
Yeah, and Julia, from a Homes England point of view, you know, your job, your KPIs are around getting delivery to happen. Do you see ways around this kind of problem of cost and lack of money supply? Are there other ways that other levers that you're able to pull on to get homes built?
Well, as I say, we've done looking at kind of lots of different options and trying to almost give the market almost lots of different options for how we support that delivery. I mean, we've announced a number of joint ventures that for delivery in that way, in which we put finance. We obviously have had the English Cities Fund for a long time. I think to the specific question about costs, I mean, they're market-wide challenges, but I think looking at ways in which we can support projects individually, you know, with their cash flow challenges, whatever those might be. We look at those on a case-by-case basis.
Danny Sutcliffe in the audience is asking about all the factors that we've been talking about, that you mentioned, Pat, around increases in build costs, rising interest rates, cost of planning obligations, and so on. Doesn't all of that on a residual valuation basis just mean that the land is actually worth less?
Yeah, on the residual valuation it does, but then the problem is that developers can't bring the scheme forward because they haven't actually got the cash in the scheme. It's an interesting point, and it's a complex interrelationship. But you know, we have numerous sites where effectively, you know, the developer has priced in optimism effectively on numerous occasions, and has got a site which is no longer viable for them to bring forward because they haven't got a deep enough pocket. Some of the bigger developers can afford to manage the cash flow in a different way and bring that forward, which is why, you know, you have the likes of Berkeley and people that can bring sites forward. But it's the second and third tier developers that struggle because they are the ones that tend to overpay.
I think that's going to segue us into a conversation about CPOs as well, because you end up in this position where you've got landholders who can't develop the land that they've got. So we've heard quite a lot about land banking and the number of consents that exist for new homes that aren't being built out. But we're also hearing that it's not so simple as just holding land as an investment and waiting for the value to go up. Some landholders just don't have the wherewithal to make schemes happen. So Pat, in terms of CPOs specifically, do you want to sort of state the nature of the problem in Slough?
Yeah, I mean, we've got some interesting ones, really. I mean, so we've got it's a particular site which I think has been owned by the same landowner for 9 years, and they've never managed to put a coherent planning application together which would get through the system or get anywhere near getting through. But a key site which blights lots of other sites and could enable the regeneration of the town centres to really move forward. But if it had not brought forward, and this particular, and there are several like this, again, their price expectation on sale is unrealistic in terms of what the current market would be. So in an ideal world, they'd just sell to somebody else who could bring a scheme forward, but they set the bar too high. At the other end of the sort of scale, obviously we've got the really large, it's our two main shopping centres are owned by a major overseas sovereign fund. Spent an awful lot of money on it, over £100 million, which is effectively small change for them, and limited incentive again for them. They can't bring a viable scheme forward. It's very small scale for them, very large scale for us and for most of the UK market. Unless they will sell probably at a significant loss, that site will just sit there and sit in their book. So that's the challenge at the other end of the scale so it's the smaller guys who haven't got the wherewithal to really bring a sensible scheme forward, through to the larger guys for whom just holding the site is a lot easier and just paying the rates and security costs on it than doing anything with it, because ultimately it's a very long term, it's an appreciating asset, but neither works in terms of housing delivery for the UK or for town centre regeneration, and it's a big problem across the country.
Thanks, Pat. Suzanne, what's your advice?
Well, what is my advice? I mean, I think we know with CPOs, it's a huge time and cost effort. It's never going to be a quick answer to resolve the problem, but that is currently the mechanism that is available to local authorities and other public bodies in order to kind of get delivery moving. Our advice would always be, get discussions underway very, very early. Always have it going in tandem. So a lot of our local authority clients, they would quite often say, we're thinking about going down the CPO route. What is the process? What are our powers? What can we do? And we can give them the advice around that. And invariably, what happens is the clients will turn around and say, well, actually, we haven't got the time, we haven't got the funds in order to do that. But starting those discussions early, starting that CPO process in parallel is really quite a crucial step, because we're not talking months in order to get a CPO, we're talking years. And there are some horror stories out there of 10 20 years to get a CPO. So it's about really starting that process early, get really good expert advisors, so your compensation advisors, because that's where a lot of the arguments are going to take place, is actually how much are we going to be compensated as a landowner for having our land CPO'd.
Thanks, Suzanne. Pat, why haven't you gone down this route to date?
I think we're, with both of the sites I talked about, one, if it doesn't sell, then we will. The other one, we're starting that process. As Suzanne said, it's a long game. So you're a long time working through the process, and that's my issue with it. Effectively, that to do it well, it takes many, many years, and you have a big long run-in period, and you have to be very, very reasonable and negotiate. And again, it comes back to the point I was making earlier. In an ideal world, I think you'd have some essentially mechanism whereby if someone hadn't developed a site by a set period of time, they would have to surrender the site as a value which was set by a formula, effectively, on this is the price per acre or price per hectare of a site in this location with this planning consent or not, and therefore that would then pass to the local authority. It has been mooted in similar terms, much smaller scale, around retail properties, hasn't it? So you could do that for housing sites. That they're designated as housing site in the local plan and hasn't been brought forward, then at a particular point and after a particular period of time, that reverts to the local authority at a fixed price, which would incentivise people to bring schemes forward and stop some of this. Again, at CPOs, there's a lot of optimism as people try and build in terms of the price that they think they should get, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Suzanne, I mean, is that feasible? Can you see the process moving in that direction?
I think it does need some radical thought process, really, doesn't it? Because right now, we have seen a bit of a shift. There are some reforms to CPO in terms of the removal of hope value. So with the removal of hope value, that is intended to be a mechanism in order to kind of help the process. It's going to help reduce the land values, because ultimately now we're saying that if you apply for that direction to remove hope value, all you're actually being able to do is offer that landowner the open market value. So we're no longer talking about the hope value of a prospective planning permission on that particular site. So that's one step forward, but of course that only came in on the 1st of October this year, so we're yet to see if that's going to produce any changes. And actually, from discussions I've had or different conferences I've been at, I've actually found that people are saying, well, actually, we're not entirely sure whether that is a route that us as a public body, a local authority, would want to actually go down, because there's now lots of uncertainty in terms of it's an additional process. So in order to disapply hope value, that's a process in itself that, again, is open to challenge, open to judicial review. That's another time period that we're putting on top of that CPO process in the first place. So I'm actually seeing some hesitation from people in terms of whether actually that's a good thing or not. I think it's intended to be a good thing, but whether it will actually yield that result is another thing. But maybe what is needed is to have almost like when we had the planning white paper back, when was it, 4 or 5 years ago, and obviously things didn't materialise. But this real kind of sit down and have a hard look at what is working, what isn't, and actually people like Pat coming up with these ideas and saying, well, actually on the ground we think this would work, and actually trying to move things forward. But I think for now there are some steps in the right direction, but whether they actually are quite as good as they perhaps are being touted to be. And obviously we've got some more reform potentially in the planning and infrastructure bill, but of course we're yet to see that. So we know that Labour have said that they want to, look at the compensation values, but whether that's how much further that's going to go beyond the hope value point, I don't know, because obviously we don't have the detail on that, and we don't have a timescale for that either. But I think in order to make things move quicker, then you are going to need some radical thinking on it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of a speculation in this conversation, because we're in this kind of it's almost like the phony war, isn't it? It's before the real change comes forward. But at the same time, the theme, the contention of this gathering is really to ask what needs to change, and to sort of consult with local authorities on what their views are on that. So what about, in that vein, a question from Danny Sutcliffe to the whole panel, but we'll start with you, Suzanne, on your thoughts on a halfway house, a sort of a raising of rates, a punitive rate on empty sites as an incentive to get them moving before you actually go the whole hog and try and take it off them.
Yeah, I personally think that potentially that could be a good way forward. There's been lots of things in terms of empty homes and way we can tackle that. So why actually can't we tackle sites in that same way? So I think that's potentially a good idea.
And would that apply, do you think, equally to the large scale developer who's sitting on a consent for 1,000 homes and has gone back and managed to get that increased density because of viability issues to get that up to 1,500 homes? So they're now sitting on a 50% again bigger consent, but still not building it out. Is it the same in that case as it is for the family landowner who's had a site passed down? It hasn't been developed for 10 years. It's unlikely to get developed for another 10 years. It's a single site. They're actually a retail business or some other business, and this is a kind of a sideline, and they're sort of almost amateurish in the market. Are these the same cases that we're talking about in terms of punitive rates and CPOs?
Not my huge area of expertise, but it doesn't feel as though that would be quite the right comparison to make, because like with the viability issues, we're seeing it with Section 106 agreements all the time, where you get your planning application in, there's then a viability issue, and then you're not getting your affordable housing, but yet so I personally think that there would be a difference to be had on those types of schemes.
Okay, Neil, on punitive rates on empty sites as an incentive.
Yeah, I think I would probably echo. I think you have to try some different tools. CPO is such a complex route to go down, and having worked on a few schemes where local authority has gone down that route, it's time consuming, it's expensive. There's a real skills issue there as well in terms of understanding those processes, and there's so I feel that aside from the stuff that the government are looking at the moment, that bringing another tool into that box to try to incentivize landowners to move has got to be worth considering, I think.
And Julia, in terms of Homes England's, I know, like, I don't want to ask you about policy change, but in terms of delivering new homes, is CPO a power that, how often have you used it, and is it something that you would like to be able to use more, or to be easier for you to use?
I think we do. So we have CPO powers, but really it's about trying to find what, working to identify what the opportunities might be and how that might be leveraged. Often it's actually local authorities that would look at CPOs, and obviously Pat's alluded to local authority CPOs already, and it's pretty common where you've got big infrastructure as well.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, back to you, Pat. The question that's come in since we started this thread was around punitive rates on empty sites. Is that something that you think would have an effect, it would get you delivering more homes?
I mean, I think it would probably have some effect around the margin, might help with some smaller sites. I think the problem with all these things, and there's all rating issues, is that there's always people will always try and find a way to frustrate, and it's the same with CPOs. You can always find a way to, I've been through in the past where you go through and you sort of win every time, and then they do something, and then you have to go back. And I think that would be, someone would put a shed on the site and say, well, that's I started some development, therefore I can pay the standard rate or whatever. So I think not a bad idea. It wouldn't do any harm. Certainly don't think it will necessarily solve the problem. The other thing, and it's a point worth making, of course, is that it may be an idea of these sites, if you were going to charge an enhanced business rate on them, to make sure that went back to the local authority 100%, so therefore could be used to help housing delivery. And so so eventually there's rather than just going into the business rate pot, of which the local authority gets about 40%, if that went back 100%, it would at least be partially compensating the local authority that's got to deal with the vacant site and potentially helping housing delivery elsewhere.
Okay, thanks, Pat. I remember a case in a city in Yorkshire where they were trying to CPO. I think it was an old post office site that had been bought. And every time they managed to get the landowner into court, they found that the land had been sold to another company, first in the Cayman Islands, then in Panama, and the trail went on, and it was months and years between each of those. So yeah, it's if they want to avoid you, then it's all too easy to avoid you, I guess. Okay, time to move on to our final theme of the session, which is around around skills development and capacity and resource within local authorities as an enabler of or a brake on delivering more homes, and in particular the news on Sunday of the Skills Hub program that the government's introducing to build skills hubs that will train people up in construction skills particularly, and to locate, I think it was 38 of them, in areas of most housing need. Neil, do you want to just fill in the gaps on that and brief us a bit?
Yeah, so obviously it's clear that this is a real key ingredient, isn't it, in ramping up construction of new homes and delivering net zero targets as well. And construction skill shortages have been keenly debated throughout my time in housing, but in the last few years, for various reasons, the crisis seems to have become acute. So there's a real net loss of people per year due to an ageing workforce and very high dropout rate of new entrants into the sector as well. So there was 300 million package announced in the recent budget for the further education sector and funding to help deliver more apprenticeships. But key to this funding, which were really positive, but key to this funding is, as you mentioned, the home building skill hubs, which will deliver fast track training in key trades, I think targeted in areas of high housing need. So it'll be really interesting to see how fast these can be developed to help meet some of those resource gaps. And many organisations, I'm sure, Pat and Slough are doing good work as well to encourage. They're doing a lot of work to encourage more entrants into the industry and to change some of the perceptions around working in construction. And I think making those connections between those existing programmes and skills hubs should really help support the initiatives. Realistically, I don't think they're going to fix short-term issues or to impact greatly on housing numbers over the next few years, but hopefully it'll help to build a flat platform that for delivery and to resource some of those gaps in the construction sector. But there's a really important element to this that I've sort of picked up and we picked up from the interviews with Pat and Nital in Slough, which is the real shortage of new workers going into public sector careers generally, and a notable lack of young people choosing the built environment as a career option. So alongside the skills hubs and funding into apprenticeships, I mentioned this to you a few days ago, Toby, but I was invited to attend a local schools career fair, and I was really surprised by the lack of awareness of public or voluntary sector careers as an option, which was a real shame. And there were very few kids who mentioned design, planning, or construction in their career choices at all. And this is something that really resonated with me at the time. What I was heartened though was by the interest that just a few minutes of me explaining the work and the opportunities and benefits of the sector and what I've got out of it. And so I think that was really positive to hear. So my feeling would be that organisations need to tap into that energy and that enthusiasm and work with the agencies, with these hubs, local schools and colleges to help raise the profile of public sector careers. There are some really excellent programmes and pathways out there that are making an impact across the sector. And I know at Red Loft, we've certainly benefited from our graduate programme and seen some excellent people progress. So that sort of joined up thinking, I think, is key. But one specific example that I wanted to share was Hounslow. I've got a programme called the Impact Programme, which is being delivered via the National Graduate Development Programme, which I think the LGA run. And that's a 2-year graduate management programme targeted at local residents, giving them a real experience across local authority services and departments. And that felt to me like an initiative, particularly if you're looking to get local engagement and local people who are interested in developing new homes and making places, I think are just making a difference to the area that they live in. So that sort of joined up thinking with existing programs along with awareness of the younger people is a key aspect for me. So
thanks, Neil. And so there's the Skills Hub program. There's the LGA, a local government association, recently launched a national recruitment campaign for local government more widely called Make a Difference, I think, following a pilot up in the northeast. And I think that's the first time that local governments had a national recruitment campaign, although the NHS and the armed forces have had them for decades. And of course, Homes England, you've got the Atlas program and other streams. So I guess, Pat, the question to you is, what is the scale of need in Slough and in local authorities more widely, and then do you get the sense that there is a kind of a building momentum, a building head of steam behind kind of recruitment and awareness building that you think is going to do the trick?
I mean, we're actually relatively lucky, certainly on the planning side in Slough, that we've got a relatively full roster of staff and can recruit. I mean, the problem with local government is some of our illogical job evaluation and grading systems. I mean, that because we're a mile outside London, we have to pay under the sort of local government structure less than the London boroughs, where clearly we're in the same labour market and everything else, and we're competing with the headquarters, all the major planning consultancies and people like that. So there are some real illogicalities in the public sector, particularly in the reward and remuneration field, which don't help us at all, and they often get worse rather than better. So I think we have to accept that's there. On top of that, I think lots of local authorities individually, and we did in my old authority in Barking Dagenham, we did a lot of work there in terms of growing our own staff in these technical areas, having career grades, bringing people in as graduate trainees, etc. There's a lot you can do yourself to grow your own supply. You accept you will lose people, and that's fine, because certainly in the planning world, a good planner interfaces with a private planning consultant, and it's happened to me several times. They've come back and said, "Oh, so and so's offered me 20 grand a year more to come and work for them." So you can't compete with that, and that's good in many ways. But I do think, however, there are two things we could do. One, things like planning and a lot of the other public sector professions are just not known about in schools. I mean, I know this is when the Romans were in charge, but I didn't even know you could be a planner or do a planning degree when I was at school. And it's not changed enormously in the ensuing 1,000 years, but and I think also, the image of local government is so negative in local press. If you read a Belgian local paper, they tend to, they have stories about the council. It's usually positive about what the council's doing. Every local paper in the UK always runs a story about, and councils do stupid things, illogical things. And it's one of the frustrations of working in local government. You have to put up with some insane bureaucracy on occasion. But on the other hand, this constant thing of councils are negative, councils are bad. And the development industry don't help, because it's always the blame the planners when often it's the politicians that are to blame for some of the issues. And I think if we had a more positive narrative about public service and about the planning profession in general from everybody, that would help as well. And because I always say to people now, well, I wouldn't go and work for the council of you, because you'll get poorly paid and slagged off. Basically, you might as well go and work for the private sector. You get better pay and everyone likes you.
Great, thanks, Pat. Okay, Julia, we've got a number of threads there. As long as the conversation is always about potholes and bins, then nobody's going to be that interested in going into a career in housing delivery. And in school, we were talking to Nita Rajput, who's a much younger member of Pat's team. And she was saying that when she was at school and at college, there was absolutely no information about the housing sector, housing delivery, planning as career paths. So there's all of that, but there's also this idea of remuneration versus purpose, and maybe people's values are shifting across the generation, and maybe that's in the public sector's favour. And then very specifically, you've got your own programme. So where is Atlas making a difference? Where is Homes England making a difference?
So that's more sort of immediate, I suppose, with Atlas. And apologies, my connection's not wonderful. So if I do drop out again, I'll join through my mobile. Typical timing. But we've introduced an Atlas programme, which is accessible through the New Homes Accelerator, and that's in recognition of the sort of additional support that local authorities actually need to drive some of this delivery currently. And so that's about having access to skills. And that's not just, planning is a very important part of it, as are construction skills, but it's a recognition that you need a full suite of technical skills to support this sort of large scale delivery. And so we have what's called Atlas. Atlas is the advisory team for large application sites, and the current route to Atlas is through the New Homes Accelerator, as I say. And that's very much looking to support local planning authorities and partners that actually in the delivery space, and helping with some of the sort of capacity challenges at the moment in delivery. So it's one of the ways. It's a lot of what you've been talking about is longer term challenges as well, but very much from a kind of an immediate, addressing the immediate challenges as well.
And in terms of supporting capacity in that way, where are you using it? Where's it happening?
Well, it's just getting off the ground, actually. So we had a call for sites that ended at the end of October. With the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government issued a call for sites, and there's been a huge amount of interest. So at the moment, there's quite a bit of work to identify kind of where that support's needed. So we're right at the kind of early point of it. But I think the hope is that really supports that acceleration that we're looking to deliver within the market. And that's a joint programme. So that's Homes England and MHCLG, who are form Atlas. So it's across both organisations.
And what about as an organisation, Homes England and its own ability to recruit? Are you sensing a sort of change, a cultural change in values that enables you to bring on more people, or is there? Do you suffer from the same problem of you can get 20 grand more if you go into the private sector?
I mean we do have a graduate programme, and there's often a huge amount of interest in that, and I personally have moved between public and private sectors throughout my career, and so I can see the advantages of both, but the kind of opportunity to be involved in the type and scale and variety of projects for me is a really big part of it. And as others have said, having really kind of promoting that, and I think getting young people to realise that is an opportunity, and how exciting and like you say, purposeful that can be, I think is really powerful.
Is that something you can get more involved in? I mean, can Homes England go into schools and start talking about what you're doing?
Maybe we should. As I say, I mean, I'm a planner by training, so I've had a very varied career, and like others, I didn't really know an awful lot about it, early on.
Suzanne, I'm assuming that this isn't something that you particularly want to comment on, but any thoughts on all of these sort of different threads around recruitment and retention in the public sector?
Yeah, I mean, everything that was just being said completely I resonate with and fully agree that actually, I'm a planning lawyer, but at no point was anyone ever talking to me about planning law throughout my career. It wasn't until I actually joined local authority, so I spent 12 years working in-house for local authorities, and that's where I discovered planning, and that's where I was like, okay, this is where it feels it fits for me, and I've taken that forward in that public sector format, and now, even though yes, I am technically in a private law firm, we only act for public sector clients. So but I do think actually getting in early, going into schools and actually explaining what local government do, because I don't think people really, and why would they? I think, if you're 13, 14, why would you really know about these things unless someone comes in and explains? And actually getting children, really young children, involved in kind of the planning application process, and what kind of design would they like, for their play parks and things like that. It gets them interested at a really early stage, and then I think it will keep them intrigued. So I'm certainly all for getting in there early, really selling the services of local government, because I think a bit like what Pat was saying, I think sometimes they do get bad press, but actually, having worked there, I know that people work incredibly hard, and don't deserve some of the negative things that are said about them.
Yeah. There were a couple of initiatives that I heard of recently. One was a graphic artist who was just knocking on all of the doors on one street, and did a kind of workshop as part of her submission for her master's degree, I think. And what she did was create a collage of images that illustrated what all of the people, young and old, in each of the households wanted to happen at a site at the end of their road, and put it into a sort of visual format so that everybody could kind of buy in and get past the jargon and understand that they could have a role in shaping the future of that place. And another, I always had thought that you could have a real simple, like a poster in a classroom that had a picture of a site, in the local area, and just had lots of little pointers coming off it that said which careers were going to contribute to the end product on that land. Everything from planning lawyer to brickie, and everything in between, all the different career options that you could pursue in order to have a role in what happened on the site on the end of your street, would be like a real simple mechanism of putting it in front of people. There must be others. Right. I've just said my bit, and we've run out of time. So I'm just going to go very quickly around each of the panelists and ask for one thing that needs to change in order to deliver more homes in Slough, particularly. Let's start with Neil, and we'll finish with Pat.
I suppose the key for me, and it's slightly more ethereal thing, but the commitment, the change in the narrative that we're seeing over the last few months, and just thinking longer term. As housing as an infrastructure investment, you can talk about the viability and capital subsidy that you need, but actually that long-term thinking about housing as a infrastructure investment is really key for me, and getting housing up the political agenda in order to be able to pull some of those other levers a little more easier. Okay, I think.
Thank you. Housing as infrastructure. Julia?
I think for me, so much of achieving at this sort of scale of delivery is about everyone playing their part, and actually so much of what I see is actually just about communicating and speaking and sharing what we're doing, and really trying to join that up in the best way we can. And so, I would encourage everyone to keep having those conversations, sort of challenging them, as an organisations to have those conversations as well.
More communication. Great, thank you, Suzanne.
Oh, well, this is a cop-out now, isn't it? Because I completely agree with what Julia said. I think communication.
You're not allowed to.
I know, I'm not allowed to. But working in partnership, I think is the thing. I said that a lot to my clients all the time. It isn't about getting bogged down in the law. Sometimes it is actually the simplest way through things is actually getting the right people at the right table at the right time, and working in partnership is really sometimes it's the simple things, but those really are kind of key to get things moving.
Yeah, so I'll call that the art of negotiation. More negotiation. Thanks, Suzanne. Pat, final word.
Yeah, I think for me it's boldness from government in terms of willingness to spend quite significant money assembling, acquiring and bringing forward sites, and backing local authorities to do that with both borrowing and debt and equity. So I think that's the only way we're going to change the housing supply position in the UK. You've got to have much more drastic state intervention in terms of land acquisition and site assembly. We can't leave it to the market, unfortunately. The house builder model doesn't really work in terms of delivering at scale. The recent, essentially, the failing of the housing association model as well in recent years. Again, one thing Neil alluded to in terms of no one being there to pick up 106 schemes, showing the housing associations aren't going to deliver it. So it's got to be the national government and local authorities, and we've got to, unfortunately, take the brakes off in terms of public spending and short-term pain for massive long-term benefit, because our society at the moment as a housing model is broken and we need to change that.
Great, Pat. And from a host's point of view, that's perfect, because it winds us back to Justin's point, which is sat in the chat, which is nothing's going to happen without more money. So on that note, we're going to end the session. Thank you very much. Warmest thanks to you for joining us, viewers. And we'll be in touch with you individually to ask what else you'd like to hear about on this channel. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking our fantastic speakers. Thank you to Pat Hayes from Slough Borough Council, and thank you Julia Krause of Homes England, and thank you Suzanne Smith from Capsticks, and thank you Neil Jervis at Loft, both for your contribution to the conversation, but also for your sponsorship for the whole campaign. And we're going to be back on Friday the 20th of December with Ealing Council in London, so watch out for video interviews from Ealing, which we start publishing next Thursday. But in the meantime, thanks again everyone for your contribution to building 1.5 million new homes. Let's hope. Goodbye.